And here we are, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Spoiler Room. Thank you for venturing down the stairs, pulling up a chair, and popping your favorite drink with us as we talk movie spoilers. Hey, it is a new month, which means a new theme. And the theme for this month is killing it. Yes, that's right, folks. We are killing it this month with 4 films with the word kill in the title. Yes. Hey, I've been doing this now. The themes, what, Ian, for like 3 years now. I've been trying to do it. I've been doing theme months, and I just keep coming up with them, and they're always fun. And so we're doing a killing it this month. And who's killing it tonight? I have a full house here, ladies and gentlemen. We have a couple of returning folks, and the man who, well, first off, we'll introduce him. The man who keeps coming back for more. It is none other than Mr. Ian Simmons. How you doing, Ian?
I'm doing great. Hopefully I won't freeze up too much tonight.
for not because of the movie, technical reasons, not because of the movie.
Yes, we should clarify.
We should clarify. And also tonight with us, he's back. If you've joined our Patreon, if you haven't, shame on you. If you have, you know his dulcet tones. He's back with us as well from the Establishing Shot. It's Mr. Jeff York. Hello, Jeff. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And I think my blog's name is very good because it's got shot in the title, which is perfect for tonight. So
that's right. It is perfect for tonight.
A month of kills. Let's start in with the shot.
That's right, with a couple of shots. And then returning to us from parts unknown after a long journey on walkabout, he is back with us. You'll know his voice. It is none other than the one and only baby spice of the spoiler room, Mr. Scotty D.
Hey, good to see you.
So happy to have you back, my friend.
I'm here to spice up your life.
You are here to spice up my life. If you wonder where that came from, folks, listen to our Spice World episode. You'll get all the details. Anyway, so tonight we are looking at 1980. Yes, we set the Wayback Machine that far behind to a DePalma film that is a bit steamy, and it's called Dressed to Kill because it's Killing It month. And tonight, let's see... Scott, can you give the synopsis of?
Do you want me to give the spoilery one or the non-spoilery one?
Whichever one you care to, sir. It does not matter.
Give
the non-spoilery one.
I'm going to give the non-spoilery one, but being what the show is called, it'll probably be spoiled throughout the show.
Oh, absolutely.
So, but for now, we'll say we. Meet. It's about several people whose lives converge. One of whom is a sexually frustrated housewife. The other is an ingenious young Lids kid. The other a call girl, and the other a psychiatrist. And they are all in the this kind of turmoil around this mysterious razor killer who seems to be pursuing them all. So
nice.
That's from the hip and trying to keep it very info free.
That was really well done. I'm impressed.
Yeah.
I'm impressed, Scott.
You could write the TV guide blurbs with
you
that.
You could write the TV guide blurbs. The little one single paragraphs. Now we're all dating ourselves. Back in the day,
log lines to go.
When you looked at the TV listing and you had that paragraph in there.
I liked the people who were, you could tell that they were just really frustrated and they just started rambling about like almost non sequiturs to trash the thing. It's like this movie's worse than my last divorce, you know. You could catch those if you knew which ones to look at.
Oh, that should be a book. Maybe it was the best of the TV guide blurbs or the best.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Actually, that would be good.
So we've got Brian DePalma, who wrote and directed this interesting film that doesn't age very well.
Nope. Sure don't.
We'll definitely get into that for a little bit. But first, we want to go around like we usually do, get initial reactions. So, Jeff, do you remember when you first saw A Dress to Kill?
I do. It was the summer of my senior year before I went to college in the fall, and it was a big deal. It's funny. It is sort of a forgotten film now. It's certainly not even really mentioned as a top 10 or, well, maybe top tier, I guess, DePalma film when they talk about him in retrospect now. But at the time, it was a very big deal. He was coming off of a good run of films that were kind of establishing him as the enfant terrible as young directors go, and he was sort of picking up the mantle of Hitchcock. There weren't a lot of sort of artistic, slick thrillers that attracted A talent, and he had done a number of them with Carrie and Obsession and The Fury, and then in 1980 he did this movie, which was a huge hit. It was kind of a slasher film in a way, but a very elegant, well done slasher film. So it broke through, and it was quite famous. Kind of revived Angie Dickinson's career for a while and made her a big deal again. And it was a very big hit that summer. I remember Siskel and Ebert were on the Phil Donahue show defending it as they were talking about sort of the fallout from Halloween and Friday the 13th and some of those kind of films. And then some people were trying to trash this one, but they said this one was very different because it was so well made and there was artistic merit. And DePalma was certainly a sort of an A-lister at that time. But it was a big deal. And I thought it was a pretty slick, cool film. It was very twisty. It was very nasty and surprising. And I think what Scott said is very great because it's not only blind, but it's like, how are these people all sort of connected? And there's literally, I think you could probably count on two hands, maybe, the movies you've seen this done, where the demise of one character introduces the other character who's now going to take over the lead of the film. It's a little bit like Psycho in that sense. In fact, a lot of people thought that this film was a kind of a parody of that, maybe dialed up in sort of the feelings of sex and craziness at the time. But I remember thinking that was something, even though I'd seen Psycho, I was not expecting. And then suddenly the film goes off in this sort of different direction in some ways. So, like I said, though, it's funny because I was like alive and well at that time, and it was a big deal. And now people mostly have sort of forgotten it, or because it hasn't aged well, deliberately so.
It might be a little bit of both. There is a lot of, while I was watching it, there was a lot of feeling of spirit of Psycho. I wouldn't say that it is like a parody or anything, but I definitely felt a little bit of spirit in there. And we'll get into that a little bit. But first, Ian, when you first watched this, when was that? This morning?
Yesterday morning. Actually.
Yesterday morning.
Yeah. This was a blind spot for me, and I'm eager to talk about it. For numerous reasons tonight. But one was just that. I wasn't. It's got a big reputation. I've heard about this film for years. I always meant to watch it, and when I finally did, it was kind of frustrating because this movie is Psycho, and it is also Carrie, and it's kind of alarming to me that people let DePalma get away with it because Carrie was only 4 years earlier than this, and yet they have the exact same opening and closing scenes. And I'm like, did no one just stop and say, Brian, what are you doing? But we'll get into that, I'm sure.
Alrighty, so Scotty D, where do you sit on the fence of Dress to Kill?
I agree with you both. It's DePalma did a bunch of these. They basically, whenever you, like, for instance, when you see like Liam Neeson in the Deadpool, say it's not a ripoff of The Exorcist, it's a homage. That's a direct dig at Brian De Palma because he was accused, because they said, no, these are homages to Hitchcock. And yes, we're using the films and yes, we know what them films are. But they're not ripoffs. And some people said, bull, they're ripoffs. and you could honestly go into either camp. And I think that what he does is he uses the blueprint of a lot of these movies. He did a Psycho with this and some of Carrie, like you said, and I had problems with the ending of this film. Like the next film, which I think was his masterpiece, Blowout, uses elements of Blow Up from Antonioni, and Body Double uses elements of Vertigo and Rear Window. I think Obsession used Vertigo, although I still need to catch up with that one. And so these all kind of used the original Hitchcock classics as blueprints for the films. But I think what De Palma did with a movie like Dressed to Kill especially, is when you watch this film, it's pure filmmaking. It is pure filmmaking, and he doesn't care if you call him pretentious or whatever. He says, nope, I'm showing off. I'm going to show you how you can use camera movement and editing and how I can convey information this way. And now I'm going to do a split screen, and now I'm going to do this. And he will use every trick in the book to kind of bring the audience in an almost shameless manner. But an elegant manner too. And so he does that, and also puts in some autobiographical parts to the story and a lot of lurid parts to the story. So what he did was he took these Hitchcock films, used them as a blueprint, added his own art school kind of sensibility that he used with films like Murder a la Mode and stuff like, or a la Mode, I think is how you pronounce it, and everything. But it's an American giallo, basically, is how he did it, because there's all this lurid subject matter, graphic violence, but it's also using this as a thing. In fact, this is Dressed to Kill is probably the second best example I've seen of what you could call an American giallo, as far as like what follows that template. The first being Eyes of Laura Mars. And it is, so I'm actually a huge admirer of this film, because I'm just in awe of how he sets the scenes up, and how every one moment leads into the next, and how important information is just very cleverly slipped in there. And if I had my notes in front of me, I'd be a lot more eloquent about it, but you know how it goes. We fly by the seat of our pants here on the spoiler.
Well, to that point, if you don't mind me saying, the thing that's fascinating to me about it is, you're right. I think in some respects, that's De Palma's reputation, and it's dogged him really all of his career. Is he sort of blatantly pulls from these things far beyond influence. I mean, they're really kind of, like, I'm going to do this for my 20 friends who will know it, or this film school grads out there who care about it, and maybe find ways to make it better or more interesting. He certainly shoots it well, but then on the other side of him, he does a lot of this really interesting stuff with the camera work and the way he gives information. And I think he's actually pretty good with actors a lot of the time, and building up scenes. And he goes there in places where you think, is he really going to explode John Cassavetes at the end of The Fury? Hell yeah, he is. And he's going to cover with 6 cameras. And we're going to see him blow up 7 different times like it's a Michael Bay oil rig, Yeah, he did that. And, he's got Cassavetes shaking like he's, Donald Trump at one of his early rallies. And
with a John Williams score, no less.
Yes, that's right. John Williams did the score of The Fury.
I have that vinyl.
And like, one of the things that I think in this film, if you don't mind me just saying one thing, is, it's funny with some of the stuff, like, okay, it's she's killed in the elevator versus the shower, and it's kind of for sexual temptation, et cetera, just like it was in Psycho, et cetera, et cetera. But 10 minutes before that, he does this incredible scene, which to me is one of like the greatest scenes in any film as far as a chase goes. And it takes place in the museum, where there's this cat and mouse between Angie Dickinson's character, Kate Miller, and this man who she's attracted to, and she thinks he's attracted to her. And, it's the use of the Steadicam and choreography, and, we're walking with her, relating to her. She's peering around the corner in this hallway looking for him and all that stuff. And it's just shocking. And then the piece de resistance that most people, I think, missed when they saw it. I'm sure you all didn't. But when she finally gets out of the museum and the man is waiting for her in the cab, and he's holding her glove, which she's lost, and that's sort of the whole impetus that gets this chase going, this slow moving chase. She looks and sees him, and the camera pans with her across to it, and literally the killer is standing right there, a little bit out of focus, but the killer's staring right at us, and then follows her direction the same way she's looking. And the fact that he put that in there, like, this person is in case you're wondering, how did the killer find her? Well, there you go. The killer was tracking her that whole time. That's fantastic. And you almost I wish it didn't do that other stuff that gets the critics and the certain people riled up, because you do stuff like that. That's pretty genius.
Well, he's big. The big running theme through this whole film is, hey, check out my long tracking shots. I mean, I know DePalma's, I know he's famous for it, but in here, literally, it's like, oh, look, here we go, another long track. And don't get me wrong, I love those type of shots. I really do. And especially back then when you're doing it with film cameras, I understand the
Steadicam was only, I think only
Rocky
The Shining had used
one.
it.
Rocky was the first movie that actually used Steadicam. According to the behind the scenes documentary to the Steadicam guy who invented it, Rocky was the first ones that shot that goes up the steps where Rocky's running and like, with that.
But it took Kubrick for you to notice it.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
But wait a minute, we're going to travel through the entire Overlook Hotel with this damn
right.
camera.
No. I mean, Kubrick used it as well, but I believe Rocky. They were saying in the documentary Rocky used it first. I don't know which one it was. All I know is you're right. Steadicam was still a new thing, and we're not talking about elaborate Steadicams. We're talking about a little more archaic Steadicam. So it still wasn't the most easiest thing to use, but they still get some really cool shots, and DePalma uses it constantly throughout this whole film in a good way. I mean, I'm with you guys. This was the first time I watched this. This was also a blind spot for me. This is the first time I watched it, and I've grown to become this real like trying to check out a lot of Hitchcock stuff, and it does just like it felt like a DePalma film though. If you've watched his other films, I loved Raising Cain. I know a lot of people didn't. I loved Raising Cain. Lithgow in there was just amazing. But this is the same guy who gave us Phantom of the Paradise. Okay, folks. So he's not completely pretentious. He's done some wild films, but
and he's done very good as a work for hire director. I mean, Mission Impossible and The Untouchables.
Yeah, I love The Untouchables. Wow.
And he did a great job with those. And I think that he's that skilled, and he can plus any script up. But when he does his own stuff, it's a little lurid.
it is his, especially with the later on he would get into the, hey, look at me, I'm going to go with the Batman villain cam anyway. But I love the shots of the long tracking shots. Those build up a lot of tension. The museum scene especially, you get that tension. You get on later on when you get the when she runs across Angie Dickinson in the elevator and suddenly you're moving through hallways. You're not just cutting from the one person who sees her and hides in their apartment to here. You're actually moving with them, and it does create an energy. I think we're so used to the cut, especially nowadays where you're getting 30, 40 cuts in a minute, sometimes depending on the movie. And here, these longer shots really help build the tension and the emotion. Plus, he's big on, like you said, the split screen. I kind of dug that storyline where you had the two different events kind of happening at the same time to convey that. It is all these technical things he's doing is great. The story, he's like, okay, we're going to throw some sex in here. And I'm going to borrow from Hitchcock. I don't care. Check out this cool camera work. And it works though visually as a viewer. It's still entertaining, even though you know what he's doing. You look at it. If you're familiar with the movie, you know what he's doing. And yet you're like, that's pretty cool.
But I will say this, and I don't want to step on anybody else's chance to say something, but in 1980, there weren't a lot of people who were that good at technique, if I dare say so. And I think that one of the reasons that people like Spielberg and Scorsese became big fast is they were very good at technique. They were very good at knowing how to do the camera thing. And the one thing I'll just push back a little bit, Mark, is I think he used not only the split screen here to often convey the duality, which is one of the themes here, but there's so many times where he's using mirrors and doubling of dialogue and two conversations going on at the same time. And there's something that's going on behind you that you may not be totally paying attention to. And then something going in front of you. There's a couple scenes where Michael Caine is listening to, transsexual talking on the Phil Donahue show, or when Kate first asks him, are you attracted to me? And he says, yes. Well, why don't you do something about it? The music stops, the great score by Pino Donaggio. And Michael Caine looks in the mirror And then he looks back at her and he goes like, well, because I'm your doctor and I'm professional and all that. And that mirror cut is there for a very specific reason. I think the fact that the script is lurid, but it's lurid leading into intelligentsia like that. That's kind of the weird duality, if I dare say, of DePalma. He's got these kind of base instincts on one side, but then he finds these incredibly clever ways of presenting them that, and especially at that time, which were the makers of a real craftsman.
The only thing I will say is, and maybe I've watched way too many movies. I probably have watched way too many movies, but I suspected within the first 5 minutes of when we meet Angie Dickinson and Michael Caine, after that, when she's in and we get I'm like, I know who that is.
Well, yeah.
Surprise me if it isn't.
There's only one real suspect in this film.
There's only real suspect. Ian, what about you? Was it that big of a twist surprise at the end, or was it watching it how it played out that keeps you going with this?
That's a complicated question. I want to touch on something Jeff said.
Sure.
The mirror thing, he actually repeats that motif 2 other times.
Mm-hmm.
I think the coolest one was at the very end where Nancy Allen is in her, panties, and she's like, "I'm gonna go powder my nose. When we come back, we'll decide. You decide if we're gonna, do this thing." And he looks at the mirror on his desk, and he kind of gives himself he starts undoing his tie, and he gives himself like this little self-satisfied nod. And if you don't know quite what's going on, you might just think, "Oh, this guy thinks he's gonna get lucky," but it's actually his Bobby personality saying, "Yep, time to go kill some people," which was really nice. I was at a bit of a disadvantage because I've seen too many movies, and also because Dress to Kill is so in the popular culture, or it was up until somewhat recently, that I'd seen the elevator scene, or at least seen part of it, and I'm like, okay, I don't know what the movie's about, but I know that is very clearly a man dressed up as a woman for some reason. And I didn't even know Michael Caine was in this movie. But when I saw him, I'm like, oh yeah, that lady did kind of look like Michael Caine. So what else do you have? What's the next 90 minutes going to be like?
Kind of looks like David Bowie to me, actually.
Well,
I noticed that.
But
they do
David
have that
Bowie's not in
rather
the
the red
movie.
herring of the big lady cop who is actually a woman playing her, but they don't do a lot with her. I mean, she's there as kind of periphery, but yeah, you're right, Ian. It's in Mark. It's pretty obvious. I think at the time maybe the novelty was, is he really doing this? Is he that guy? Yeah,
because it was Michael
doing that
Caine.
role.
Yeah,
that was
Michael.
kind of a little novel then.
It's kind of like when you had Wesley Snipes and Roadhouse, Patrick Swayze doing Tu Wong Fu.
Oh yeah,
You called him
sorry,
Roadhouse.
Sorry, no, Mr. Roadhouse. I was
Patrick Roadhouse Swayze.
I was flipping through the Rolodex of my brain. Okay,
Pain don't hurt.
I was flipping through the
Patrick Double Deuce Swayze.
How much did they pay Ben Gazzara for that film? I want to know.
I love Roadhouse.
I was flipping through the
awful.
Rolodex of my brain. But when they did to Tu Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything,
Julie Newmar.
Julie Newmar, that was one of those where it's like, holy, here you have these actors who were in action film, dressing in drag, and now I could see the big deal with A Dress to Kill, Michael Caine being this established actor. Not only that, but British, because back then in the 80s, if you were classy, you had to be British. If you weren't British, you weren't classy. But no, I'm just kidding. But so to see him in a role like this, I imagine that is part of the red herring that possibly DePalma's playing on, going, people wouldn't believe that Michael Caine was actually in drag, dressed as, that could be Michael Caine. No, I mean, but the minute you see the still, you're like, oh no, that's Michael Caine.
I don't even know if you were meant to really be that in suspense over who it is. I think it's just really seeing how it all plays off, because I'm sorry, I can't remember if it was Jeff or Ian that said that there really is only one suspect. That's absolutely correct.
That's Jeff.
Yeah, Jeff. Okay, thanks. And that's absolutely correct. There really is only one suspect, and it's kind of like seeing how all this plays out. Now, one thing a distinction, of course, we're probably going to want to say between Tu Wong Fu, which I haven't seen. I was a Priscilla guy. And this is that the presentation in Tu Wong Fu was a lot more celebratory and sympathetic than this is by a long shot. This is, and DePalma says, I had a psychiatrist and I double checked every single thing to make sure I was absolutely correct with my scientific theories that I was saying and blah, blah, blah about this and this and this. Well, yeah, there was a lot of misogyny in psychoanalysis in that period of time, like around like the 60s into the 70s, going just barely into the 80s, where these were the same people who were saying, oh, yes, people who cross-dress or are transgender are somehow mentally deficient, people who are gay or mentally deficient, people, of course, women, another one the film touches on, of course, all women secretly fantasize about being raped. That was a common one throughout the 70s. These days, we would all recognize this as absolutely abhorrent and not reflective of the real world or scientific knowledge at all. But at the time, and unfortunately in the very male-centered sphere of this, that's what was happening at the time. And so the film doesn't age, like Mark said, very well, but that is like kind of the realm you're going into. And so you're like, okay. And it definitely plays poorly. But again, that's all the stuff it was kind of going on, which, again, Hitchcock was also drawing on in the 60s, so.
What were you saying?
Well, I guess let me ask you, Scott, like, what specifically is the problem with the way that transsexuals are portrayed in this film? Is it just that it's the person happens to be the psycho killer? Is that the main gripe?
I will say, sorry, my cat's upset that he can't have his treats now, so he's making a mess around here. I will say this, is that I don't think the film was meant to be transphobic, because you actually do get the character towards the end, and even though it's like a very much a perfunctory character towards the end of the film, that you get an additional transgendered character, it's very it was a very positive thing, like, oh, and it's a competent working person who doesn't look like they're ready to go off the handle at all, and from this film we'll take it. But yes, I mean, like, if it really draws very heavily on the power of the sex organ, and all people who have a bit of a gender dysphoria dream about, like, men who have gender dysphoria, who are born biologically male, have a gender dysphoria, and they want to, like, cut it off and all this stuff. These are all things that are drawn upon in the movie. And I think that, and of course that is kind of archaic compared to what we know now. And I think using that as, because it's an art film, but it's also an exploitation film. And I think using that as, like, kind of the exploitation hook, it would be very easy to look at this and say, yeah, it's kind of a transphobic movie, guys, and kind of a misogynistic movie too. I don't necessarily think on purpose, but I think it is.
I don't see it as transphobic at all.
Really,
I see it as very sympathetic in a lot of ways, because the fact that we have a killer who is, and we have to go back to the context of 1980 as you laid out. We don't have all of the, I guess, postmodern baggage that you've laid out in relation to how the times have changed. But I mean, you have Psycho as a template, and you've got a guy who went crazy and took on the persona of his mother and dressed up as a woman. But in this film, I feel like DePalma is really trying to explore what that means and society's lack of acceptance for that and what that could do to someone, especially if you are a psychiatrist and someone who's supposed to have it kind of all together. What is going on in that head? Now, this movie is not about our doctor character. It's not an exploration of his turmoil. It is very much an outsider's view, but you have the Donahue segment. You have the person who is interviewed as the person who transitioned. At the end, you do have even though it's part of a dream sequence, which is really kind of strange, but the conversation between Keith Gordon and Nancy Allen about the medical procedure and actually explaining that there is a science to the procedure of changing gender, as it's called. I think a truly exploitative movie wouldn't care at all about those things. I think it's complicated because yes, this person goes crazy and is a killer, but then again, is it not transphobic to say that you can't have a character like that play any kind of part or be that kind of a character?
What do you think, Jeff? Where do you stand on this?
At the time it was rare and there wasn't much known about it. So, but I mean, in some respects, I know this is going to sound like I'm hedging, but I think you both raised a good point. And I can tell you, having seen it at the time, that was one of the problems with the movie. I think that the movie in some respects started, I think, a pattern of wondering why DePalma was doing some of that. And I think some of that's a little unfair, but at the same time, it became a pattern. And it was one of these things where if I look at Dress to Kill, I think the entire thing is very sex shaming in its way, and a little bit goes too far. And you just wonder, I mean, yeah, that's in a lot of films, and the morality is evidence in everything from Scorsese's Catholicism to Hitchcock's being a heavyset man who didn't get the leading blonde, et cetera, et cetera. We could find all those kind of implications. But I think the one thing that probably hurt this film, and maybe hurts it as the aging factor too, is it's a collective kind of meanness, and maybe that's the best term. And I'm not quite sure why that's there. I watched the DePalma documentary that was done by Noah Baumbach, and I forget who the other filmmaker was a few years back. And it was very interesting, but it was kind of surfacey. Like, there were a lot of funny anecdotes that De Palma told, but he didn't really get that deep into his themes and stuff like that. And yet, in so many of his films, there's these recurring themes, and there's viciousness in the way people, I mean, for example, here you've got Kate Miller, who's this, forlorn woman who's probably a bored, Beverly Hills housewife or New York housewife, whatever it is. She cheats on her husband, which isn't good. But then she gets a venereal disease, which she's already shamed about. And now she's going to have to go home with that. And she doesn't know what she's going to say to her husband. And, and then they get the little girl looking at her, shaming her, which is very Hitchcockian in its way. But then, she's not only attacked in the elevator, but if you've seen the uncut version of it, De Palma did a shot where the last slice is from her vagina up to her throat.
Oh,
and they cut that. But it's like, why did De Palma film that? Is it that necessary to do that much? I mean, she's already, that hand with that famous cut across it, which was kind of an iconic shot from the promotional stills. At once the people realize that Dickinson's character dies, 45 minutes into it. It just starts to get really mean. And then, the Dennis Franz character as Detective Marino constantly putting down, and he's the comic relief, but it's all the sake of, Liz Blake, the hooker with the heart of gold, if you will. So I think there's just kind of a meanness about everybody's sex in this film, and nobody's kind of getting off the hook. So if you're a complaining transsexual, get in line. I think it's all kind of nasty, but I think De Palma's trying to have some, dare I say, dark humored fun with it, as he often does in a lot of these kind of things. And this film, it comes off as a little mean.
It is mean towards sex. It really is.
There is some dark humor. I mean, the title is a pun,
right?
I would probably say I do think it's a little more sex positive in how they cast, say, the Nancy Allen character.
Yeah.
And that, yes, she's a prostitute, but she's also actually, but how is she a prostitute? Well, she's a prostitute for kind of high-rolling executives who and she uses the information she gets from them to make investments, so she's not going to have to be a prostitute.
Boy, was she ahead of the curve in the 80s, huh?
Yeah, exactly. And
Well,
this is
I mean,
1980. Yeah, exactly.
But there is a direct line between her character and Jamie Lee Curtis's character in Trading Places,
Yes,
and Rebecca De Mornay's character
in Risky Business.
2 years later, because I was watching her and Keith Gordon. I'm like, that is Tom Cruise. Well, he looked more like Curtis Armstrong from Risky Business, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's some weird dynamics.
The only guy who doesn't
Mm-hmm.
who gets off the hook because he's clearly a virgin, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, I kind of get the dark humor in it. I think this is handled to our. This isn't like Verhoeven satire, though. I mean, this is, if there's dark humor in here, it's a little bit, I think, more subtly done.
It's very dialed. It's dialed back, but it's there.
Yeah. It's there. I get what you're saying now that you mentioned it. And also Dennis Franz, I just laugh because here we are 40 years later, and I'm like, oh, look, it's Dennis Franz. Oh, look, he's playing a detective. Wow. What a stretch for his character.
Just once.
He's great.
Ted from out of town. You tell Ted from out of town to get downtown and in town.
No, oh no, he's great. Don't get me wrong. He plays that role beautifully, and you play to your strengths. And as an actor, if that's going to get you work,
he's the comic relief in it,
by all means, go for it. But it was just hilarious to watch a young Dennis Franz show up and go, I bet you he's the detective. Oh shit, sure enough, he's the detective.
see the next movie, Blowout. They finally decide to kind of cast him as something different. But just once, I wish I could have seen Dennis Franz play the romantic lead, and he's also like a choir director. You know, all right, yous kids.
You call it that harmony. You call it Saint Francis.
There you go.
Very nice.
No, I liked his character quite a bit. He was the comic relief. But at the same time, he adds to it as well. He's the cops, but this thing does have that grittiness to it. That's one thing. It has that 70, even though it's made in 1980, it has that 70s procedural type of grittiness to it. Like we reviewed, what was it? Nighthawks, I think, a while back, and as far as the look and the feel of the city and everything, it still has that grittiness to it, almost that Taxi Driver type of grittiness for the city, and that being this place where you're just like, I need a shower now. Even though you're dealing with a little bit higher class, supposedly, people, it still has that grittiness to it. And I think that helps add to what is going on, and maybe add that little extra atmosphere to it of disturbingness to it, especially when they go to the mental hospital and we get that sequence after it's been revealed. Yeah, folks, spoiler if you didn't pick up on it. Yep, the shrink is the killer. He's in Bellevue, and I'm like sitting there and I'm just watching that whole sequence with the Bellevue and the inmates in that, and how he's supposed to escape. And I'm like, okay, DePalma, you had me till here. Now you're just getting into way too much asylum trope right here.
It takes so long, and it's clearly a fantasy the way it's lit.
It's a dream. Yeah,
it's a dream, and it's like, can we get this? I mean, that scene, I think, was truly sort of indulgent, and I think that didn't help it, because I think that's where he goes, all right, like there's actually one theme in this movie that I think is very clever, and he does not talk much about this when I've even read interviews at the time about it, but there's that great clip, that great quote from Hitchcock where he said, I don't want a bomb to go off under a dining room table and everybody's surprised. I want you as the viewer to see the killer put the bomb, or know that there's a bomb under the dining room table, and the people sit down to eat and they're perfectly innocent. They don't realize what's going on, and you're going to be in agony because you think they're going to all get killed. In some respects, I think that's the cleverest thing about this film, is we, as the audience, are the only people who have sort of all the information, and really, not necessarily that we could figure it all out, but at the very end, when Keith Gordon, who's probably the smartest guy on screen with the stuff that he's, filming the comings and goings of the doctor's office to find out who's who, and at the end he's got it set up and he's getting closer and it's raining. Of course, he's got the glasses, so he's wiping his glasses. But as he's peering in, he thinks he's got it all figured out, and then boom, he's grabbed, and you think, oh shit, he's gone. Somehow the killer went outside and got him first, but it's of course the female detective who's just getting him out of the way because she's got to stop the killer. But we have at least the knowledge that we know what the killer looks like, and we've seen them in sort of the when the killer then shows up. Like there's that great subway chase where the killer is in pursuit, and even with the cab driver who knocks him down with the cab door at the end of that little chase part. I think it's very clever that DePalma is investing with us the bomb under the dinner table stuff, and that we know some of these things that are going on that really all the other characters walking around on the screen don't know. And poor Liz coming in at the 45-minute mark is like, what the hell's going on here? She's the Vera Miles character from Psycho, who's when she discovers Mrs. Bates, she's just like, why is there a corpse in the bottom of the house here? For all of us in the audience, it's like, oh my God, that doesn't bode well, because that means that Norman was dressing up. And that's kind of the coolest thing about this movie, is that really we're smarter than everybody else on screen because we've seen more than they have.
Well, the coolest part about the movie is that cab driver is played by Bill Randolph.
That's right.
Who would go on to be impaled by Jason Voorhees 2 years later, playing Jeff in Friday the 13th Part 2.
That's right.
That's right.
That's hilarious.
I was trying to place him.
Yeah, I was. You're right on the whole.
He was the guy who was stoned, right, and kept laughing. Like, anyway, go ahead.
No,
not that I want to remember that movie that well, but.
That's another conversation for another time. But no, you're right. I think that's what touches on what we were talking about earlier in this discussion tonight, is the fact that it is pretty obvious that Michael Caine's the killer. I mean, he's not really a great shrink. When you're asking questions and, with Angie Dickinson, and she goes, well, would you want to fuck me? And he's like, well, yes, of course. I'm like, what kind of shrink are you?
Exactly.
Well, I disagree. I think he was very good at what he was doing. And mostly what he was doing was making her think about her marriage, about her life choices, and kind of laying out. He was the out. He was the crazy Ralph character saying, don't go there. It's got a death curse. If she had followed his advice and just gone home and talked to her husband, she wouldn't have gone out to that museum and gotten the venereal disease that eventually led to her, being in that elevator. When he said what, but the other thing is, because the answer that he gave when she said, would you want to fuck me? And he said, yes. And she's like, why don't you? He said, because I'm married and I have a wife that I love. Right. It was a lie, but that's supposed to help her reframe. Well, maybe I shouldn't be fucking around like this.
Right.
So,
yeah. That's true. But I mean, it's still pretty obviously that he is the killer. And it's that Hitchcock knowing the bomb. You want to see how this plays out. And it's pretty confirmed when he meets Dr. Levy. I mean, if you haven't picked up who Bobby is at that point, when Dr. Robert Elliott meets the other Dr. Levy, you look at it going, oh, okay, well, that just confirms it, because Dr. Levy's like, yeah, sure, we'll talk to Bobby in just a little bit. Let's go to my office, shall we?
Two things, Mark.
Yeah.
One, and Jeff, you're going to help me confirm the second point.
Okay.
Or refute it. Roger Ebert's Law of the Economy of Characters. Yes, Michael Caine is very obviously the killer in this movie. However, it's the killings happen is like right around the half-hour mark that Angie Dickinson buys it again, in keeping with the Janet Leigh Psycho motif. But by this point, if going back to 1980, if we haven't seen all these movies and pop culture references in the ensuing 40 years, so we don't have the time to sit there and go, oh shit, that's Michael Caine in a dress. we might not have been introduced yet to the person, in the story. That might be someone that is coming up later that would make more sense that that's the killer. So I'm talking about 1980 mind frame. It's not that obvious. And this is where I need your help, Jeff. In terms of, the whole idea of Bobby and running into the doctor on the staircase, did you, as Mark suggested, pick up on that connection then? Because I read it as, I was like, I'm pretty sure the doctor is also treating Michael Caine, but he could also be playing it, because I hadn't seen the movie before, as Bobby. There's something going on with Bobby, who is actually my patient. I'm trying to protect, or maybe I'm in on this, these murders somehow. What was your read on this when you saw it? I know you saw it, when you were, pretty young, so I don't know how much you were thinking about these things, but were there light bulb moments going off at this point?
There were. In fact, my question was, does he treat both Dr. Robert Elliott as well as his alter ego Bobby? I wasn't quite sure where the line was blurred for Dr. Levy, because it was like he seems to know more than he did. And I also thought that Levy potentially was a late minute accomplice, to your point, or another red herring. That you raise a great point though too, Ian, because the fact that there's the old trope that if you ever read anything about how to write a screenplay, you're supposed to introduce all of your major characters in the first 20 minutes, and anybody who's kept after that better be talked about, or it's kind of rare that happens. And here's this major character who literally doesn't come on at all until 35 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever it was into it. So to your point, I remember when I was first watching it, I knew the doctor was a suspect. But then I was thinking, well, they're introducing the Liz Blake character late. Maybe there's other characters that'll be introduced later too that we don't know. So at that point, to your question, I think I looked at Levy as like he knows something, and something is amiss here, and that's why this scene is there. Though I will say, by that time, I had figured out that Bobby was also the name of Robert, and that we had like 20 minutes left and didn't have any other suspects. So I think it's probably Michael Caine. And I remember that character was pretty big. The other thing too that's funny is once you see this movie, it's and this is part of that I wonder if this is where DePalma is working too. But there was somebody who famously said, and I want to say it was maybe Stanley Kaufman, but he said the first time you watch Psycho, it's a horror movie. The second time you watch Psycho, it's a comedy, because you start seeing all of the stuff that's setting up Norm Bates, like, well, my mother's not feeling her, or how you say, herself today, things like that, man, once you see, like, there's that shot where he's coming right towards the camera with the switchblade, and even though he's out of focus in the background, the final slice that he's going to start getting at with Kate in the elevator, the Angie Dickinson character, it's clearly Michael Caine. He's got a very distinct nose and those thin lips. It's like you can put the biggest ass sunglasses on him and this big page boy blonde wig, and it's like, it's Michael Caine.
It's Michael Caine.
It's hard to see it in all these instances. Like, oh yeah, Bobby's pretty big, and Bobby fills out that black leather jacket pretty good. I mean, they may say, well, the cop's a big woman too. It's like, that's after the fact.
What were you gonna say, Scott?
I was just curious. I mean, because I honestly didn't know. Did they use Michael Caine for the actual? Except for the end, of course. Did they use Michael Caine for those sequences? Because I know that some filmmakers who have done something similar will do like a stunt double or something.
Tony Perkins wasn't in the shower scene. He was doing a play in Broadway.
Exactly.
Michael Caine is in that shot from the museum, and he's in a couple other key shots, and that's him the entire time.
It is him.
In the elevator.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool. What do you think about the Levy character, Scott? Do you think it gives away, pretty much confirms if you haven't picked up by that point, or do you think
no? But I think it does. But I mean, I think I also kind of looked at this as when I first saw this movie, I looked at it in a different way. When I first saw it, I think I caught it on VHS in the mid 80s, early 90s. And one of the really old big box Warner titles.
Oh, yeah.
It was like one of the ones. So even then, it barely ran anymore. You know, when I got it from the TV repair shop / video rental store.
Yeah.
And so when I plugged it in, as I'm watching it, and I've already seen enough DePalma to know that, what his things like. I've seen Body Double, and I've seen, of course, the more, later films and stuff. And I'd even seen Sisters at that point. So about 45 minutes in, when the blade comes out, I'm like, oh, Psycho. He's doing Psycho. And, and to his credit, this is what doesn't make it a ripoff in my thing, is like, he doesn't say, what, Psycho? I've never heard. I don't know what you're talking about. He doesn't do that. No, he very clearly says, oh no, it's Psycho. But also, I think it's like basically seeing how it all works out, because I really wasn't trying to figure out who did it when I first saw it. I said, you know what? This movie is giving me a bunch of information, and it's going to kind of present itself in a way in which it's all going to kind of unravel for me. And it's not really asking me to do that. And I'm sure that when I watch this a second, third, and fourth time, I'll be looking for all the little spots. And I did, and I've seen the movie probably like 8 times now. And I look every time I look in that Levy spot scene, and like you say, and how Dr. Levy is very guarded when he speaks. He says, I see. Okay. Yes. And you could say, like, you could say it's just a distant psychoanalyst, psychotherapist who's in public. They're in the hallways of the institution, and then he says, like, let's go to my office. I mean, if you can read that innocently, but when you see it again, it's like you said, Jeff. When you see it again, you pick out all the things, and that's how I did it. So, like, first time I did it, I wasn't really trying to figure out who did it. Because honestly, that's usually the least interesting part of mysteries to me. Just last night before I watched this, I finally got around to Haunting in Venice, the latest one. Poirot. The least interesting thing about the movies to me are how they wrap up. And I'm not going to say how it wraps up. All 3 of the movies, the most disappointing part of the movie is how they wrap up for me. Because, and I know I'm talking about a classic and stuff, but it's how it's done. Because I've either called it, or it's just not as interesting. What's really interesting is seeing how everything plays out and how all the clues are laid there. And
that's interesting that you say that too,
going
Scott, because I think one of the things we've discussed here tonight too, directly and also inadvertently, is how that kind of stuff changes over time. I mean, just for what it's worth, when Albert Finney as Hercule Poirot explains everything in Murder on the Orient Express, or even when Peter Ustinov picks up the mantle and explains everything in Death in the Nile. Those are highlights of those movies, and they're very clever, and the way they're filmed and edited, and it's all put together for you. And,
it's done well.
Yeah,
it's
but
done
I mean,
well.
Here we are 30 years, 40 years past that now, and we're CSI'd about it, because CSI gets over that stuff real fast. Because it's like, people aren't interested in this. This is the science stuff. This is the explanation stuff. Let's get it done quick. And I think it's one of the faults of Kenneth Branagh's films, is that he's not really embraced the, if you will, fun of that. But then again, maybe that stuff has been too many murders, and we've all seen 8,000 of them of the time we're 18 on television films. So we don't need it belabored. But yeah, I think in some respects, this is more of an exercise in style and and sort of seduction in its way, and sort of filmmaking, just in the sort of bravura-ness of his camera work, and every picture and cut has a meaning to it and stuff, more than like, is this really good mystery? Well, it's a good mystery film, but it's maybe not really a good mystery.
That's a really good way to put it. And it's like I was saying at the beginning, the reason I love this movie, and I love basically Dressed to Kill. I love everything about, except for like the last 5 minutes. I do think the ending with the dream sequence, and yes, the ending is a ripoff of his own.
It doesn't even need it.
It doesn't need it. It's not necessary.
Funny if they just ended with that lunch scene. I think that would have been hilarious. Just end with that. Like
I think
they're
it would have been
explaining it just
fine.
like Simon Oakland did in Psycho, and yet it's even worse now. And that couple that there's like the woman's fainting as she's hearing about the
Well, you
vaginoplasty and stuff is hilarious.
You
End
literally
it there.
you literally get that the psychologist speech
Yes.
in the
Norman's
dream
not himself
sequence.
anymore.
You literally get
He's
nearly
editor
word for
Tony
word.
Vincenzo. No, I'm just kidding.
In her dream sequence when she's dreaming that she's talking to the detective who said, "Oh no, I set you up because I couldn't get a quarter."
Oh, I don't think that's a dream.
But when they set it up to where they have the Levy or whatever ask him, Levy almost says word for word what the shrink says in Psycho. I mean, it was like almost shot the same way, and I'm just like, come on, man,
Here's what they do. Ebert always had a thing, and he used to do this with. I think he used to do this with one of his like classes that he used to have, and they used to talk about Psycho being an almost perfect movie, but the one part they would talk about is that exposition at the end.
Yeah.
And how the film really kind of grinds to a halt with it, and it doesn't need it. And I honestly think that it could have been better, because this one, Brian DePalma doesn't just do that once. He does it twice. And I don't think the dream sequence actually begins until you are in the the asylum.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
I think the rest is
Can I just defend? And I'm not going to, because I wasn't alive at this time, but I'm just going to defend the Psycho explanation thing. I think that was for Middle America.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
They didn't know that shit then.
No, but it's like,
by today's standards and the Phil Donahue programs like they have in this movie, that seems unnecessary. It's like 1962. It wasn't.
That's probably a good point. And I think the answer after several years that they finally came up on with the Ebert thing was that it would have been better if the scene was shortened but not eliminated. That they said if the scene ended when Oakland said sometimes he was always Mrs. Bates, but he was never always Norman. If it ended there, they said the scene would have been perfect. But hindsight, and it's Hitchcock. Who are you going to argue with? but like I'm kind of getting in the weeds. But yeah, I mean, I think that yeah.
You're gonna say something, Ian, or
no? I think I got a kick out of the fact that again, this meant nothing in 1980, but in 1984 it meant something that our Dr. Levy went on to become the mayor of New York in Ghostbusters.
That's right.
That's right.
I would have loved for there to have been a scene where our Michael Caine said, if you can help us find the killer, you will have saved the lives of millions of registered voters.
Yes, this man has no dick.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow, that's really
perfect.
Mark, can I hijack your show for a quick question for the three of you youngins?
Go for it.
Okay. I don't know how young you think I am, but okay.
We're younger than Jeff, so there.
All right.
I was impressionable film fan when Brian DePalma was becoming the thing, and I mean I saw Sisters in the theater and The Fury and all. I saw Carrie and all that kind of stuff. I was like, wow, this is cool. And for a while there, it was kind of Coppola and Scorsese and Spielberg and DePalma and maybe Bogdanovich to some degree, though I think he quickly petered out after his three big starts.
Is that a pun?
I didn't realize it as perfect. How perfect a pun was it? I don't even know it, and I'm doing it in my sleep.
Petered out.
But
and once again, we're back to Peters. Sorry, go ahead.
The question for you three is, what do you think is like DePalma? I don't want to say he's forgotten, because there's numbers of critics who love him, and we could go on and stuff. And you said you've seen the movie 8 times, Scott, which is wonderful. But I think he's not really put up very high anymore in the world. And I'm curious as to what your three opinions are on that, because you grew up sort of in the time when he wasn't a big deal, but as you've gone back and discovered more of his oeuvre and know what he's done in the last 20, 30 years, what's your take on him as a filmmaker, just as sort of a big picture take from where you sit as critics?
What do you say, Ian? We'll go with you first.
I mean, DePalma is one of those guys where I've seen a bunch of his movies. But he's kind of like the Coen brothers in that, you say, oh, he did Sisters, and then he did Carrie, but he also did The Untouchables. And, such a wide range of movies that it's hard for me to pinpoint, oh, I've seen, so many DePalma films, because there's some I probably didn't even realize were DePalma films. But, what's his legacy today? Or, I don't know I'm looking at his IMDb. The last thing he did was a movie called Domino in 2019, which I've never even heard of. So I don't know. I respect him as a filmmaker. I don't love everything that I've seen of him, but he's cool. Why don't people talk about him that much anymore? If that was even the question, I don't know. I'm half awake, but apologies, Jeff.
Sorry.
No, it's just, I'm not sure about like legacy or why he's not, talked about as much anymore, possibly because, he's not putting out movies. I don't even know if he's working on anything. Is he still alive?
He is, but I think he's retired.
Yes.
There you go.
Well, there you go. What about you, Scotty D? What do you think with DePalma?
I'm going to make my my Film Geek Central co-host Austin Kennedy very happy by parroting him. When people talked about, Scorsese and Coppola as like the major forces to come out of the 70s cinema, and you had everybody else like, Raffleson and Bogdanovich and everything else. I agree with my friend when he says DePalma deserves to be put as high up as Scorsese and Coppola. I think he was that good. I think he was that much of a person who said, no, we're filmmakers and we can use these tricks and we can use these techniques to tell the story. It's not just a way to hold the script. It's a way where the film itself becomes a way to tell the story. Mm-hmm. And I think you can see elements in a lot of his things. I think one of the reasons, and I think he's kind of gotten thrown off to the wilderness, like a lot of filmmakers of that era who are still working but having trouble getting their films made, say like people like Schrader and Walter Hill and stuff. I know that these are very different filmmakers, but they're also filmmakers that, tackled a very specific type of tackling their films that is not as celebrated now. And every DePalma film, especially the early ones, was met with some form of controversy. And for everybody, usually everybody that loved them, there's just as many that hated them. I know that Dressed to Kill was extremely controversial because of the subject matter and because of the Hitchcock comparisons. I could say the same for a lot of the films. Scarface was a film that is considered a cult classic now. Personally, I don't think I wouldn't even put it in my top 5 of his, but it's a cult classic now. At the time, no, it wasn't universally loved. Some people really loved it, and some people said it was the most grotesque, gratuitous thing, And this is kind of a thing. And eventually, if he kept making movies, and they'll let you make movies as long as you want, as long as they make money. As soon as you stop making money, they stop making movies. Mission Impossible was a huge hit, and you can do whatever you want. I think it might have even been his next movie after that was Snake Eyes.
Yep,
which was not a big hit. I think it's a great movie. No, is it as important as Dressed to Kill or Blowout? No, but it's a fun thriller, and it does have a lot of great technique. It opens with like an 18-minute tracking shot.
Yeah, which we talked about. We did talk about here in the spoiler room. Shameless shill. Okay.
There you go. And that film didn't make a dime. So next he did like Mission to Mars, which of course was a debacle in like all sorts of ways. And then so what happens next? Well, I have to go to Europe and start making the films that I was kind of got off the beaten path doing. And so he does Femme Fatale, which is also controversial, but not as many people see. And everything was kind of this thing. Basically, they'll let you do what you want until you become too much of a pain in the ass. And if the studios think you're a pain in the ass, and if audiences say, I don't want to put in that much work, they're just going to kind of shove you off to the side. I don't know if that's why his films became longer in between, the space in between when he was just making film. Now suddenly it was like 5 years, 10 years between the times he was making movies, and how often they were seen. I don't know if that's the reason or if it's just that they decided that he wasn't worth it. I mean, I know that one of his last movies, wasn't one of his last movies Redacted?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was that was extremely controversial because Fox News turned that into like the great cause of about 2 months worth of programming about how horrible they were to make this movie, and yet there was as many people saying, well, no, this movie's important. So and studios will like that if the publicity is good enough, and audiences will like that if it keeps them coming back. But if it doesn't make money, and if you become too much of a pain in the ass to one or the other, they'll get rid of you. Because unlike what the saying says, yes, there's very much such a thing as bad publicity. I've been on the side of bad publicity. Trust me, there's a side of bad publicity. It's like when people are talking about you and saying, "Ooh, should we check this show out?" That's good publicity. When people are calling your house and sending you death threats through the mail and stuff like that, which they did to DePalma and they did with me on something very much smaller on that no one cares about anymore, that's bad publicity. and I think that's what it is. I think that DePalma, he was this, revolutionary, and studios don't like revolutionaries, and sometimes audiences aren't ready to deal with the baggage of revolutionaries. And I think that that's why he's not as celebrated, but I think he should be, because yeah, he has some stinkers in there. Everybody does. He'll even admit it, Bonfire or the Vanities. Oh no. But I think that what he did do, especially with those films that really hit, was so important. And it's such a wonderful instruction on how you can use movement and technique and storytelling, and you get into your actors' heads, and you get into all the psychology, and you bring all these elements together into it. It's just wonderful. It's like watching this great it's like watching a puzzle solve itself. It's amazing. So I'm a big fan personally.
You don't say.
Yeah.
I've always liked DePalma films that were wide release. I discovered more and more of his library, and I'm like with Ian, there were some films when I was younger I didn't realize were DePalma films till I got older, because as I've mentioned on the show before, when I was younger, unless it said Spielberg on it or whatever, I didn't really pay attention who the director was, or Burton. I just
not me.
No, I know you, but I just went to the movie to watch the movie, but I didn't quite pay attention to the director. But that's why I mentioned Raising Cain was the first one where I recognized the name, like, oh, DePalma, oh, he's made this, and oh wait, no, I've seen this and this and this, and I wanted to see Raising Cain, which I did, and I really enjoy, and that's just because I also like John Lithgow, but and I think he's amazing in it. But if you look at it, I honestly think that DePalma in some ways took, if you pardon the comparison, a Burton approach to making film. Tim Burton will come right out and say some of the films he did was specifically to earn enough money to make the films he wanted to make. So he made some of those big studio films that made okay money, but not fantastic, but enough to where then he could do the project he wants to. And if you look at the filmography of DePalma, it's kind of like that. He does Untouchables, he does Mission Impossible, but then he follows that with a bunch of smaller films, quote unquote smaller films, but they're films that maybe he wanted to actually make. But then he gets popular enough, he gets a buzz name enough, because Hollywood's all about the buzz and who's the hot ticket. Like, oh, people have been talking about DePalma. Hey, you want to make Untouchables? He's like, how much are you going to pay me? This much. And he's like, I got these 3 scripts over here. Yeah, I'll do it. And never mind the fact that it's a big commercial project that he's probably not as invested into as, say, a film like Dress to Kill or Body Double. I watched Body Double many times, and I'm not going to lie, because it was on Skinamax at 11 o'clock at night, and I was up that late, and I'd flip through the channels, go, oh, Body Double.
I love Body Double.
Later on, as I got through puberty, I appreciated Body Double for a lot of other reasons besides the obvious pubescent.
I think it's interesting. I loved all of your opinions on it because I'm a DePalma fan too, and I will say this. It's funny you bring up Tim Burton because I like Tim Burton too, but I don't think Tim Burton's made many good films. I think he's shown a lot of good technique and some cleverness, and certainly his production design, things like that. But does anybody think Alice in Wonderland's a really good version of Lewis Carroll's story? I don't think so. And yet it was a big hit for Disney, of course. And I think, a lot of it is the money. Some of it is the sexism or the perceived, wokeness of today that makes DePalma seem like a dirty old man and stuff. But it's funny, if you actually look at his list of films, he's got a lot more hit films and a lot more cult classic films. And I think things that have been regarded much better 25 years after they were than most of the celebrated filmmakers, other than maybe 5 or 6. I mean, if you want to talk about, like, I think, for example, there's no getting around the fact that Coppola early on wrote Patton. He did The Two Godfathers, The Conversation, Apocalypse Now. If he did nothing else than that, he's one of the most important filmmakers in the history of cinema. But he hasn't done much since then. De Palma has not only the commercial hits, and like I would, there's not a lot of big movie hits that were as well done as Mission Impossible or Untouchables. I think his direction added a lot to those films and stuff. And, films like Carlito's Way are much more well thought of now, and they're sort of a rebirth of discovery of those. Even some of his cruder stuff like Sisters and, some of those things. Blowout is considered, I think, a true classic that it's got Travolta's best performance, and it was so clever in so many ways. I would also think it's funny, and we've talked about this before. In fact, I know we're going to do one on your show at some point, but I would say that De Palma has not only done well with actors and all of the technique of cinema, but he's done score after score. This man hired Bernard Herrmann when people weren't hiring Bernard Herrmann, and he did the score for Obsession. Yeah, and that led to I think Scorsese getting him to do Taxi Driver. And Pino Donaggio's score for Dress to Kill is phenomenal. That score is so, it's like John Barry mixed with Ennio Morricone, and it's sexy and sort of insinuating, but then it's also very dramatic and sort of big, and I think he's kind of a you just wonder, like, in another 10 years, maybe after if he dies between now and then, if there'll be a little bit of a looking back at his career going like, wow, he maybe did some lurid stuff, but he had a lot of good movies in there. I think he bombed with Bonfire of the Vanities, and I think The Black Dahlia as a James Ellroy book should have been a miniseries instead of the movie, which was half decent, but it needed more time. But he's got a very impressive body of work, and I don't think he gets the credit for it.
Well, I think part of it might be something that Mark touched on, and I think I was fumbling around in the dark during my ramble, whatever the hell that was, a little bit ago. But he has, I think, 4 huge movies under his belt. But you used the term Middle America a little bit ago, Jeff. The average person wouldn't know that they're Brian De Palma films. They probably wouldn't know who directed them.
Right.
I'm talking about Carrie, which is a classic horror movie.
Yep, it's a great
People
film.
think, oh, that's a Stephen King movie. People think Scarface. People think of Scarface as an Oliver Stone film.
Right, because he wrote it.
He wrote it, and he's the one who primarily talks about it, and he's a huge director. The Untouchables, that's all about, Kevin Costner and Sean Connery's, romance. And then Mission Impossible is a Tom Cruise movie,
right?
And that was the first one. De Palma launched that, but then it's been a succession of different directors, John Woo and J.J. Abrams and on forth. So that's the thing, is like when you think about Brian De Palma, you think about most of Brian De Palma's filmography. Most people wouldn't know what is A Dress to Kill, what is Body Double, what the hell is Sisters.
Yeah.
But his biggest movies, they don't know that he made them. It's only
But-
for the cinephiles and the De Palma fans. So when you say, like, why doesn't he have more cachet? To your point about, Coppola and The Godfather and Apocalypse Now, those are, I mean, more so The Godfather, but those are like pop cultural touchstones that affected pop culture. I mean, The Godfather essentially invented the mob story that has been Xeroxed for the last 45 years.
And for my money, I think it's the greatest film ever made. I can't believe it when you watch that movie that they did everything right in that film. I mean, it's just it's shocking. And like Gordon Willis's cinematography didn't get an Oscar nomination. It was considered too dark at the time. Now everything is dark, and it's like it looks so contemporary. But anyway, I digress.
That's criminal.
Yeah.
Scotty, what you gonna jump in? What you got?
Well, I was just gonna say, and I agree with you on certain points, but I think that's more. I don't necessarily think that's the fault of the movies, though.
I'm not saying
they're
that
not
at all.
considered that? Because like if you look at and I don't think you were but like just to put like or to interject or whatever, I don't think it's the fault of the movies. Like for instance, in Carrie, you can see very much the De Palma technique, not just in suspense. You can see like there's for instance a wonderful shot when William Catt, its character, is listening to Sissy Spacek's character in the
they do the
classroom.
diopter.
Yes, exactly. And when they pick on her, and William Catt actually has the sympathy to say to the teacher, "You suck," and and even in other things like Mission Impossible. Yeah. Oh yeah. But what do we know? What was De Palma often called when they did call him something? They called him a modern master of suspense. What is the one scene we remember so much about the original Mission Impossible? Going from the ceiling down, that entire sequence that is almost dialogue free and just every sound amplified.
That don't have any dialogue for 10, 12 minutes on screen. It's unheard of by today's standards. You would
no
never
one's going
have
to
a
do
script
that.
that's done that.
Sure,
that's
I understand.
That's him. That's him, and that's him doing that. And
but there are a lot of other directors, action directors. Again, you don't watch that scene from Mission Impossible and think, "Oh, that's the guy who made Carrie."
Yeah,
there are other masters of suspense, and in terms of technique. The point I'm trying to get across is, De Palma has made some amazing movies that are household name movies, but he is not a household name. He's kind of a victim of glomming onto, not glomming onto, but taking these assignments and making them the best they could be, these huge successes. But it's like, who made them? I don't fucking know. Tom Cruise, maybe Stephen King.
It's
to that point too. His big champion. Oh, I'm sorry, Mark.
No, I was just gonna say, if you want to, you could always call it what I would call the Nightmare Before Christmas effect.
Yeah, very good.
When you say Nightmare Before Christmas, everybody thinks, "Oh, Tim Burton." They're like, he didn't direct it though. It wasn't him. It was the guy who did Coraline. It was not Burton.
Wait, Tim Burton. No.
But
by the way,
because it's got his production design, because it's got his identity, his artistic.
Well, same with John Hughes. John Hughes had a lot of acolytes who, like Home Alone, he didn't direct that. It was Chris Columbus. The one thing I will just say too that we haven't brought up, but and it's neither here nor there, but one of the big champions of Dress to Kill, to your point, Scott, about it divided audiences, it divided critics, it became, half the press was scathing about, the other half was like, well, it's art. But his big champion in the film criticism world was Pauline Kael, and she thought he was one of the top 2 or 3 directors of that era, and she constantly was championing him. And she's been gone for how many decades now. And, I think that helped him at the time, and especially as I think film criticism and film analysis and, film as this art medium became much, much more of a thing that people were really starting to notice. And they went back and discovered it in filmmaking of great popular filmmakers like Hitchcock or John Ford or, Billy Wilder and stuff. But that helped him too. But, I think there's not as many champions of him today. And I think if my guess is, if you'd ask most people if they even knew De Palma, they might default to say, "Oh, that guy who had to kill women on screen all the time," which was only in a few of his films. But, with the drill and Body Double and the elevator scene in this one, it built him a little bit, and I think unfairly, as a sort of misogynist director, when I think, if anything, he was an extreme moralist, maybe to the point where he was taking out all kinds of people for their shenanigans.
I think that the I agree with that, and a lot of it, and it sounds kind of elitist to say this, but a lot of the time, the problem with how filmmakers are perceived is the problem of the people who are perceiving them. It's the audience, not anybody here, not any specific person at all, but audiences at large, in a group. Like when you say that they do consider Nightmare Before Christmas a Tim Burton film, DePalma is the person who just slaughters women, and when they do these things, I think that is the fault of coming to simple answers. Oh, you fit in this spot. You fit in this exact box, and that's the box I'm going to keep you in, rather than actually explore what else this filmmaker has to say. And I think that a lot of filmmakers become victims of that from the 70s, 80s, even today. So.
Well, I take your point. I think part of that, though, and if you're talking about the wide general audience, we can't really put that on them, because the average moviegoer isn't a cineast. They watch what's on TV, or they go to the movies maybe once a month. And so if they see something like, oh, this is the one where the guy attacked the woman in the elevator, and then maybe a couple of years later they see Dressed to Kill and there's more violence going on, they might say, yes, this is the guy who doesn't like women very much, not necessarily thinking, oh, well, I'm going to go watch the rest of his filmography. It's easy to get put in these boxes. It is not fair, but it's also something that is just, especially nowadays with the ubiquity, we're all awash in content, as it's called now. It's hard to keep up with anything. I can't even watch a damn streaming show anymore because there's 60 others that I'm constantly chasing the red light.
And we'll wrap it up here. I know we went long tonight. Thank you all, but I'll just say a couple others that come to mind that are like that are now celebrated or at least recognized is Roger Corman is one who made a lot more films than people might think. They think of him with his exploitation stuff and his lower budget horror stuff, but there's a reason why he got an honorary Oscar a number of years ago, because if you suddenly look at what he produced and who he worked with and who he gave a chance to work with, you realize, he made the exploitation films, but look at the body of work and who he worked with and how many of those actors still remember working with him. So even though he might be, that B horror guy, well, that B horror guy worked with this A-list actor and this person gave this person a chance, and he's finally being recognized. I'll take another one, Fred Olen Ray. Fred Olen Ray's known for a lot of his exploitation stuff. He writes a lot of other stuff, which I didn't quite realize till I explored. When I was younger, Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers. Okay, I love that movie. All right. I know him of his exploited stuff. But if you look at his filmography, he's got exploitation. Wait, he wrote a family film? Wait, he wrote an Emmy award-winning series? Wait, he's got an Emmy? This is the guy who wrote Hollywood Chainsaw. You know what
and you can probably see some of his Christmas movies on Hallmark Channel this year.
Exactly. He's made Christmas movies. So I think it is. It's kind of the same thing with DePalma, is that people don't realize, they get attached to one thing because, as Ian said, they don't watch as many films as like the rest of us. So they only associate that person with that movie, not realizing, this person is, it's like Alex Winter. Oh, he's the Bill and Ted guy. Well, no, he's done so much behind the scenes producing music, and he's a noted guy in the business, but to the public, they're like, oh, he was a minor character in Lost Boys and he did Bill and Ted's. Well, he's done so much more than that.
That Zappa documentary is great.
Yeah, I've got to see that one. But, but I think it's just exposure for the big films, for the modern audiences. It takes maybe shows like this, maybe someone will hopefully enjoy the conversation we had tonight and maybe seek out DePalma stuff, going, oh, it's that guy, really? And look at his other stuff, because I think some of these filmmakers are finally now maybe they don't deserve like huge recognition, but at least getting recognized for the work that they did at a time when that type of work wasn't being done. Like DePalma and his work, like his film work, his technical skills. We take it for granted today. It's, people say, oh, I don't look at films from such and such a while ago. I'm like, watch any Alfred Hitchcock. And I've said this before, and I will say it all the time. Watch any Alfred Hitchcock film. You will see Spielberg, Scorsese, Oliver Stone. You will see Cameron. You will see so many of these.
Oh, look at the kitty.
DePalma. You'll see definitely DePalma. You'll see the big named directors that are so famous for these trilogies, and you will see those influences from these folks, from DePalma, even from Hitchcock, from those earlier guys who were doing it, but maybe not the recognition. And someone else who was a cinephile who wants to be a director going, that was awesome, I'm going to use that in my movie. And so we'll wrap it up tonight. Thank you for the extended conversation, folks. I hope you enjoyed this conversation and you seek out DePalma films. They're interesting. Even if they aren't all great, I will say they are interesting to watch. The majority of our we talked about Snake Eyes a while back in that wonderful tracking shot. We've talked about some of his other films. We'll probably be talking about Carrie in December. I think that's the last film on the Perfect 10 series, but that's the remake.
That's the remake.
Not his. I know.
Oh, yeah. Never mind then.
But we may talk about the original as well as a comparison, so keep an eye out for that. But yeah, so hope you enjoyed this conversation, folks. And now this is where I give my wonderful crew who listen to me babble every week the license to shill. So please, you are welcome to shill. Jeff, go ahead, you're first.
As you can read, the establishingshot.org is my movie blog. I've been doing that for 12 years, 13 years now, almost. Yeah. And I also do 2 essays a month for Pipeline Artist Magazine online about the industry. And I also am on TikTok, Jeff York Chicago. I do little 1-minute movie reviews that also incorporate my caricatures and sort of why I draw them the way I do to accompany the review. So those are my 3 little places you can find my oeuvre online.
Wonderful artwork. Check it out, folks.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely entertaining for sure. And Scotty D, I know it's been a little while, but you do still have some stuff out there. Go for it.
It's out there. You go to movieocrity.com. That's where some of my writing is. Also filmgeekcentral.wordpress.com. I have a web series called Movieocrity. You can catch all the episodes on Vimeo. And I hopefully will have something sometime soon, but I've been saying that for a while, so we don't put a time on it. but I am working on stuff right now. So yeah.
Fantastic. Movieocrity.com. Check that out, folks. I'll put links for everybody's stuff in the body of this. And of course, Ian, the floor is yours, sir. What do you got to show?
I'm Ian Simmons. I run Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com. Also on YouTube. If you go to YouTube and type in Kicking the Seat, you'll find my site there. I do movie reviews and interviews and live streams and all that good stuff. So, and I'm also here on Monday nights talking with you about crazy movies.
Well, I appreciate all 3 of you for joining me tonight in Spoiler Room. And if folks you at all are interested after watching their wonderful content, if you haven't been ruined by it, you can check my stuff out at specialmarkproductions.com. You can slum it down there. We got a lot of links there for a lot of stuff we do there. TikTok. I got a Patreon as well, which the more we can do there, the more we can do here. I've got some stuff there. I started a buck and a Dollar Tree. Basically, it's called I buy that for $1.25, where each month I take a stack of buck and a quarter DVDs I've acquired from Dollar Tree, and people vote on which ones they want to get an exclusive review on. I've been a little slow on it, but that's going to pick up now that I've got some other things out of the way. So yeah, it's specialmarkproductions.com for all your movie man needs. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to my panel. And yes, Killing It month. We take a stab next time What is up next? This month we're doing Faster Pussycat Kill Kill. At the end of the month, we're doing Machete Kills.
I think next week is A Time to Kill.
And next week is A Time to Kill. Thank you very much. See, that's why I have you here, Ian, because I can't keep track of shit. So there you have it, folks. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you to our live streamers. And until next time, we'll just say good night, everyone.
Good night.
Slow tracking shot down the hallway as everybody goes to their room.
Dun, dun.